My bedroom door moved in the dark, like someone had pressed their full weight against it. I woke up fast, not slowly, like my body had already decided it was danger before my brain understood why. The room stayed black, except for the thin line of hallway light under the door. That line bent and shook as the door shifted. I had shoved a small rubber wedge under it before I went to sleep. It should have been stuck. It should have held. The wedge scraped across the floor anyway. A slow, rough sound. Push. Stop. Push again. Like someone tested how much force it took before it gave. I held my breath and listened for anything else. Footsteps, a voice, a cough, anything that made it normal. All I heard was the door, and then a wet exhale close to the crack, like someone had leaned down near the gap. I whispered, "Mom." No answer. The door moved again. Harder this time. The wedge squealed. My heart hammered so loud I thought whoever was out there had to hear it. I stared at the handle. It did not turn. That was worse in a different way. It meant the person was not trying to come in like a normal person. It felt like they were trying to see if I was awake without making it obvious. I called out louder, "Mom, are you okay?" Still nothing. The house stayed quiet. No rushing steps. No sleepy response. Just the door being messed with in small, patient movements. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and the screen lit my room for a second. It was late. I did not even read the time. I only saw my own hands shaking, and the outline of the wedge near the bottom of the door, still barely holding. I slept without a top sometimes. It was my room. It was supposed to be safe. In that moment, none of that mattered except the fact that I was suddenly exposed, like the darkness had stripped my privacy away. I grabbed the closest shirt and pulled it on with clumsy hands. The fabric caught on my hair. My fingers felt numb. The door shifted again, and I flinched so hard my shoulder hit the wall. "Who is that?" I said, trying to sound angry instead of scared. "Stop." Silence. Another push. The wedge scraped forward a fraction of an inch. I slid out of bed and moved to the door as quietly as I could. The carpet felt cold. I crouched and stared at the bottom gap. The wedge looked crooked, like it had been forced sideways. Whoever was out there had kept at it long enough to change its angle. In my head, I tried to make excuses. Maybe the cat had knocked into it. Maybe my mom had gotten up and needed something. Maybe there was an emergency and she did not want to wake me fully. But if there was an emergency, someone would have said my name. I put my fingers on the wedge. It was tight. I had to tug. My hand trembled against the door, and that was when I realized the person on the other side was so close that my movement made them stop. The pressure against the door vanished, like they stepped back. That made my stomach drop, because it meant they were listening to me. I pulled the wedge free in one sharp motion and stood up. For half a second, I thought about putting it back and locking myself in. For half a second, I thought about texting my mom and waiting. then the handle did not move, and the silence stayed thick, and my fear turned into a different feeling. Anger. I had to know who was standing at my door in the dark. I cracked the door open. The hallway light spilled into my room, and my eyes adjusted just enough to see him. It was my mom's boyfriend. He stood right in front of my doorway, too close, like he had been waiting for the wedge to slip. His face looked slack and unfocused, and his eyes did not quite meet mine. His hair was messy. His shirt hung wrong, like he had thrown it on without caring. And the smell hit me a second later. Alcohol, sharp and sour, floating off his breath and clothes. He did not speak. I waited for him to say something normal. Sorry, wrong room, bathroom, water, anything. He just stared past me, not fully at me, like my door had been his destination. And now he did not know what to do because I had opened it. My throat tightened. I forced words out anyway. What are you doing? He swayed slightly, then steadied himself with his hand against the wall near my doorframe. Still no answer. No apology. No explanation. Only the sound of his breathing and the faint hum of the house at night. My skin went cold under my shirt. I felt small in a way I hated. This was an adult in my home, in the hallway outside my bedroom, in the middle of the night, drunk and silent. I swallowed and spoke slowly, clear enough that I hoped it would carry. You are making me uncomfortable. Go back to the living room. Go to bed. His eyes flicked, and for a second he looked like he might smile, but it did not become a real expression. Then he just stood there again, like he had not heard me. I did not wait. I stepped back and closed the door. I put the wedge back under it with shaking hands and shoved until it bit into the floor. My chest hurt from how hard I breathed. On the other side, I heard a soft shift, like he had moved closer again. This started as a simple argument about privacy, but now I stood in my dark room with a door wedge pressed tight, listening to an adult man linger outside my bedroom like he belonged there. And all I could think was the question that made my mouth go dry. Why was he at my door again, when everyone should have been asleep? After I shut my door that night, I understood something I had tried not to name before. My bedroom was the only place in that house that ever felt like it belonged to me. The kitchen was shared. The living room was shared. Even the hallway outside my door did not feel neutral when he was there. My room was my one boundary. 4 walls, one lock that did not always latch right, one door that was supposed to mean stop. I stayed in that room as much as I could without making it a fight. I kept my clothes there, my school stuff, the little things that made me feel like a person and not a guest in my own home. When I closed that door, I expected the world outside it to stay outside. That expectation sounded simple, almost childish, but I needed it. At night, I slept how I slept. Sometimes I wore a shirt. Sometimes I did not. It depended on the weather and how restless I felt. I never thought of it as a statement. It was just comfort in my own space. I was a teenage girl in her own bedroom. That should have been the safest and most normal thing in the world. My mom did not control every sound in the house at night. None of us did. Houses creaked. The cat moved around. Pipes ticked. My mom got water sometimes. She went to the bathroom. She checked the front door if she thought she heard something outside. Those were normal night noises. They faded into the background after a while. And then there were the weekends. When my mom's boyfriend stayed over, the house changed even before anything happened. The air felt different. Not in a dramatic way, not like a horror movie. More like my body stayed slightly tense without permission. There was another adult in the space, another set of footsteps, another voice, another person with keys and opinions. My mom tried to keep everything calm, like it was just company, like it was normal. He was called E. I did not call him that to his face. I usually just spoke when I had to and stayed polite. I told myself that being easy to live with was safer than being difficult. I told myself my mom deserved to be happy. I told myself that if I made things awkward, I would be the problem. During the day, he could act normal enough. He joked with my mom. He brought food. He talked about work. He acted like he belonged there. But at night, the normal rules blurred because he drank more on weekends. I did not always see the drinking, but I heard it in the way his voice got thicker and his steps got heavier. Doors closed harder. The bathroom light clicked on and off more than once. The living room TV would go quiet, and then there would be silence, and then a sudden sound again. I tried to ignore it. I told myself adults were allowed to relax. I told myself it was not my business. But my body never fully relaxed when he was in the house overnight, because my body understood something my mind kept trying to smooth over. People moved around at night, and that could feel normal until it did not. The hallway outside my bedroom was narrow. Sound traveled. If someone stopped there, I could hear it. If someone brushed the wall, if someone paused, if someone shifted their weight, it was close enough that it felt like they were inside my room. And once I noticed how close it was, I could not unnotice it. I started paying attention in small ways. I listened for my mom's footsteps versus his. My mom walked lighter. She moved with purpose. If she got up, she went somewhere and came back. E dragged his feet sometimes. He paused more. He stood still in places where there was no reason to stand still. I did not want to accuse anyone of anything, so I kept it in my head as a private list of details. In my mind, privacy in my own room should be a basic rule, not a rule that needed negotiation, not a rule that depended on who had been drinking, not a rule that changed because it was the weekend. If my door was closed, it meant I wanted to be alone. If I was asleep, it meant do not wake me unless something was wrong. If I was changing clothes, it meant knock and wait. Those were the kind of rules you did not even have to say out loud in a healthy home. But I had started saying them out loud anyway, because the hints were not working. I remembered the first time I woke up with prickling feeling of being watched. I did not see anyone. I just heard something near my door, like a breath or a shift, and then the soft retreat down the hall. When I sat up and listened, the house went back to quiet too fast. It made me feel like I had imagined it. That was the worst part. The uncertainty ate at me more than a clear threat would have. Another night, I heard the floorboard outside my door creak, then creak again, as if someone had stepped back and forth in the same spot. I stared at my door for a long time, waiting for a knock. No knock came. Eventually, I heard the bathroom door close. I lay back down and forced myself to sleep, but I kept the blanket pulled high, like it could protect me. When morning came, it was always normal. My mom made coffee. The cat wanted food. E acted like nothing happened. If I looked at him too long, I felt stupid, like I was inventing danger out of shadows. If I said nothing, I felt guilty, like I was protecting someone who did not deserve protection. That was the trap. Nothing happened in a way I could point to in daylight. But at night, the feeling returned, sharper each time, and my room felt less like mine. I did not want to tell my mom, not at first. I did not want to make her choose. I did not want to be the reason her relationship became a fight. I also did not want her to look at me with that question in her eyes, the one that asked if I was sure. Because I was not sure. I only knew how it felt, so I tried to solve it quietly. I started keeping my door shut. I started changing clothes faster. I started sleeping with a shirt more often than I wanted. I started listening harder, training myself to wake up at small sounds. I turned into my own security system, and it made me tired and angry in a way I could not explain to anyone without sounding dramatic. The worst part was how simple the boundary was. All I wanted was my door to stay closed, and for nobody to be right outside it without a reason. But that rule was already being tested before the door, which ever showed up. The first time it happened, I did not even understand what I was waking up to. I only knew I had opened my eyes, and there had been movement near my door. Not in the hallway, in the frame itself. A shape paused where a person would have been if they had leaned close, like they were deciding whether to come in. I froze so hard my body hurt. My brain went straight to the worst thought, because the worst thought was the one that matched the feeling in my stomach. Someone was close enough that if I sat up too fast, I might have seen their face. Someone was close enough that they might have already seen me. I pulled my blanket up to my chest and waited for a normal sound to follow. A quiet, sorry, a soft knock, my name, anything that turned it into a mistake. Instead, the shape moved away without a word, and the house fell back into silence, like nothing had happened at all. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was the cat. That was the easiest story. The cat pushed doors sometimes. The cat wandered. The cat made strange noises at night. But the problem with that story was simple. The cat did not stand still like a person. The cat did not pause at my doorway and then leave like it had been caught. I started sleeping lighter after that. My body did it on its own. I did not choose it. Every small sound pulled me half awake. The floor creaking, a cabinet closing, a step on the stairs. I hated what it did to me, how quickly I went from calm to alert, like my brain had decided my bedroom door was no longer a real barrier. Then came the night that made it impossible to ignore. I woke up because my door opened, not wide, just enough to change the line of light on the floor, just enough to let the hallway glow slide into my room. The sound was soft, like someone had done it carefully, like they had tried not to wake me. That carefulness made my skin crawl more than a loud mistake would have. For 1 second, I stayed still and listened. I hoped it was my mom. I hoped it was an emergency. I hoped it was anything that made sense. I heard breathing. It was close. Too close for the hallway. Too close for the other side of the house. It was right there, in the crack of the door, like someone had leaned forward to look into my room. My eyes flicked toward the opening, and I could not see a face, but I saw a shadow shift, and I understood I was not alone the way I was supposed to be alone in my own bed. I did not scream. I did not move. I had the sudden, sharp fear that if I reacted, the person would step in. I had the fear that if I pretended to sleep, the person might stay. I felt sick, and then I felt anger right behind it, because the sick feeling was mixed with shame. Shame was the fastest emotion. It replaced everything else like it had been waiting. I thought about what I was wearing, or not wearing. I thought about how the blanket sat. I thought about the idea of someone seeing me like that, not by accident, not with permission, but because they had decided my door did not matter. I did not want to be ashamed in my own room, but the feeling was there anyway. The door eased back toward closed. The hallway light thinned. The shadow disappeared. No apology. No explanation. Nothing that could be confronted in daylight. The next day, I finally spoke up in the only way I knew how. Not with accusations. Not with the truth of how afraid I had felt. I chose the safest version of my complaint because I did not want to start a war in my own home. I told my mom I needed more privacy at night. I said I wanted my door to stay shut. I said I did not like people walking in without knocking. Even as I said it, I watched her face, searching for any sign that she understood what I was really saying. I saw annoyance first, not fear. Like I was making a small thing into a big thing. Like I was being difficult. And that reaction made me shrink inside myself. I did not want drama. I did not want to turn her relationship into a choice between him and me. I did not want to hear her defend someone or explain away something that had already made my stomach turn. I wanted my space. I wanted my door to be respected. That was it. The conversation turned into what it always turned into when I tried to talk about boundaries. It became about tone and attitude and how I said it. instead of what I was afraid of. My mom told me not to be rude. She told me not to assume things. She told me that people got up at night, and it did not mean anything. I nodded and backed down, because backing down had become my reflex. I hated that about myself, but I did it anyway. It felt like the only way to keep peace. After that, I stopped asking for permission to feel safe. I started doing small things. I kept a chair near my door sometimes, not pressed under the knob like in movies, just close enough that I could grab it if I needed to. I kept my phone charged. I slept with a shirt more often even though it made me uncomfortable. I listened for footsteps like it was my job. None of it fixed the main problem, which was simple. A door in a home only mattered if everyone agreed it mattered, and I could not make them agree with words. I thought about a lock, but I did not have one. I thought about asking for one, but I already knew what that request would turn into. Questions, suspicion. Why do you need that? What are you hiding? Why are you being dramatic? I did not want drama. I wanted a locked feeling without a lock. So I looked for something that could not be argued with. Something small. Something cheap. Something that did not sound like an accusation. Something I could place there at night and remove in the morning like it was nothing. I needed a solution that protected me and also protected me from the fight that would come if I admitted how scared I had been. That was how I ended up staring at a simple rubber door wedge online, feeling my face burn with embarrassment, even though nobody could see me. I told myself it was for the cat. I practiced the line in my head. The cat kept pushing my door open. I wanted to stop it. It sounded harmless. It sounded normal. It sounded like a joke. But I knew the truth even then. I bought one small object because I did not trust the people in my house to respect one closed door. And I told myself that once it arrived, this whole thing would be over. The door wedge arrived in a small package that looked harmless enough to be forgotten on a kitchen counter. It was just a thick piece of rubber, darker than I expected, with a rough bottom that looked like it could bite into the floor. When I held it in my hand, it felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of a problem nobody wanted to say out loud. That night, I waited until the house went quiet. I listened for the usual sounds, the TV fatting, the bathroom light clicking off, the last footsteps settling. Then I opened my door just enough to slide the wedge in. It fit too well. The moment it pressed into place, the door stopped moving completely. I pushed the door from my side, testing it, and it did not budge. Not even a little. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders drop without forcing them down. The relief made me angry because it proved how much fear I had been carrying. I had been living like my door was a suggestion. Now it felt like a boundary again. In the morning, I took the wedge out and hid it in my room like it was something private, because it was. It was not a decoration. It was not a convenience. It was the closest thing I had to a lock. Later that day, my mom noticed it when I left it near my door while I changed my sheets. Her eyes went to it and then back to me, like she had found a question she did not want to ask. "What is that?" she said. I had already decided what I would say. I kept my face calm and my voice light. "It was for the cat," I said. "She kept pushing my door open at night." That was the safe version of the truth. It was the version that did not accuse anyone. It was the version that made it sound like a silly, normal problem with a simple, normal solution. My mom stared at the wedge for a second, then nodded once. "Okay," she said, and she walked away. No argument, no lecture, no questions about why I needed it, no warning about being dramatic. She just accepted it like it was nothing. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me uneasy, because my mom had fought me on privacy before. She had acted like I was overreacting. She had made it about my attitude. But now, she accepted the wedge with no pushback at all, like she did not want to discuss anything connected to my bedroom door. It was like she was relieved that I had handled it quietly. That first week with the wedge felt like my body learned how to sleep again. I stopped waking up to the smallest creaks. I stopped staring at the crack under my door like it was an eye watching me. I still listened, but the listening did not control me anymore. It sat in the background instead of sitting on my chest. The house even sounded different when I felt safe. Normal noises stayed normal. A pipe ticked, and I did not sit up. The cat thumped off the couch, and I did not hold my breath. I got through nights without replaying the same thought over and over. If someone tried to come in, the wedge would stop them. That was the idea. That was the comfort. A simple object that did not care who was on the other side. For a while, nothing happened. No movement at my door. No careful opening. No shadow. No breathing in the crack. It was almost enough to make me believe the problem had solved itself. Almost enough to make me feel guilty for ever being afraid. But the calm did not spread through the whole house. It only reached my room. Outside my door, my mom changed in small ways I could not explain. She started moving through the house like she was carrying something heavy inside her chest. She smiled less. She looked distracted, even when she tried to act normal. Sometimes I caught her staring at nothing, like she was hearing a conversation in her head that she could not turn off. When I tried to talk to her, she answered, but her voice sounded far away. She listened, but it felt like she was listening through a wall. I did not know if she was tired, or stressed, or angry at me, or angry at someone else. Then she said the sentence that made my stomach tighten. "I just need time," she told me one afternoon. Her eyes did not stay on mine. "I need time to sort out my feelings before we talk." We talk about what I wanted to ask, but I did not. I had learned not to push when her voice got like that. It was not loud, but it was final, like a door closing, but without a wedge to hold it. For For the next few days, the house looked normal from the outside. The same rooms, the same routines, the same sounds. But inside it, the mood stayed wrong, like a low hum I could not escape. The wedge kept me safe at night, but it did not stop me from noticing things. My mom checked her phone more. She kept it face down on the table sometimes, like she did not want to see it light up. When it did light up, she would glance at it too fast, like she was afraid of what it might say. And then the weekend came again. I heard her moving around earlier than usual, cleaning in quick, sharp motions. I heard her open the front closet. I heard her pull out extra towels like she was expecting company. She did not say his name, but she did not have to. The whole house felt like it waited for the same thing. When he arrived, I stayed in my room longer than normal. I listened to their voices downstairs, and I tried to measure the distance between what sounded normal and what felt safe. That night, I put the wedge in place and tested it twice, pressing my shoulder into the door until it held firm. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was just another weekend. I told myself my mom would talk to me when she was ready. But as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about her detached face and that quiet sentence. She needed time to sort out her feelings. Whatever my mom had learned, she was not ready to say it out loud. After the wedge worked, I stopped thinking of myself as scared. I started thinking of myself as careful. That sounded better in my head. Careful meant smart. Careful meant in control. Scared meant helpless. But my body did not care what word I used. Every night, the routine started the same way. I waited until the house sounded settled. Then I checked my door with my hand on the knob. I closed it until I felt the latch catch. Then I slid the wedge under the gap and pushed it in with my foot until it resisted. I did it slowly because I listened to the sound it made on the floor. If it scraped too loud, I imagined someone hearing it and understanding what it was really for. When the wedge held, I stood there for a moment and stared at the door like it might betray me. I pressed my shoulder into it once, just to feel it refuse to move. Only then did I let myself get into bed. It should have been a silly object. Instead, it became a signal to my brain. This was the line. This was what stood between me and the hallway. I started tracking noises like they mattered. Not because I wanted to, but because my mind did it by itself. If I heard the bathroom door click, I counted the seconds until the light went off. If I heard footsteps, I listened for the rhythm. My mom walked with a certain pace. He walked heavier, and when he drank, his steps dragged. I hated that I could tell, because it meant I had been paying attention too long. Some nights I slept fine. Other nights I woke up, and my first thought was the door. I would sit up and stare at it, checking the line of light under it, checking if the wedge looked disturbed, checking if the doorknob shadow had shifted. I did not always remember waking up in the morning. I only knew because the wedge would be slightly angled, like my foot had nudged it when I got up to pee, and I had put it back in place, half asleep. My phone never left my reach. I kept it face down beside my pillow, volume on, brightness low. I told myself it was in case of a fire, in case of a break-in, in case the cat got stuck somewhere. But the real reason was simpler. If something happened again, I wanted a light. I wanted a screen between me and the dark. I wanted to be able to call someone without unlocking my brain first. I also started thinking through the house like an exit map, which was not normal for me. I noted the way the hallway narrowed near my room. I noted which floorboards creaked. I noted how long it took to cross from my bedroom to my mom's room. I noted where the cat liked to sleep because I did not want to trip over her if I had to move fast. I even thought about what I would say if I had to yell. Not just my mom's name. The words that forced an adult to stop because other adults might hear. The kind of words that sounded like trouble. I practiced them silently because saying them out loud felt like inviting the situation back. During the day, I acted normal on purpose. I did not want to look like a kid who was afraid of her own house. I talked to my mom when I needed to. I did my chores. I kept my face calm. I laughed at the right moments. I kept my distance from E when he visited, but I made it subtle, like a normal teenage mood. I told myself that if I stayed polite, nothing could be turned against me. That thought was ugly, but it felt practical. I did not want to be accused of making things up. I did not want my mom to think I was trying to ruin her relationship. I did not want E to have any excuse to call me dramatic or disrespectful. I also did not want to accuse anyone without proof. That was the rule I clung to, even though it made me feel trapped. Proof was hard to get when the problem lived in the dark. Proof was hard to get when the person did not leave fingerprints, only feelings. Proof was hard to get when the thing they did could be explained away with one sentence. I must have been half asleep. I was looking for the bathroom. I thought I heard the cat. I did not mean anything by it. Those explanations were always ready, and I could already hear my mom repeating them if I brought it up wrong. So I stayed quiet. I stayed prepared. The wedge became my compromise with myself. It was my way of saying I was not helpless, without forcing anyone else to admit there was something to fear. But the longer I lived like that, the more I understood what it cost. The wedge did not fix the feeling in my chest. It only gave me a tool to manage it. It did not make the house safe. It made me harder to reach. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, I caught my mom staring at me with a strange look, like she wanted to speak and could not. She looked tired in a deeper way than lack of sleep. Her patience was thinner. Her voice sounded tighter when she talked to E on the phone. Then, when she noticed me listening, she forced her tone back to normal. That scared me too, because it meant she knew something was wrong, and she was still letting him come over. One evening, I heard her talking in the kitchen, low and sharp, then stopping when I walked in. She did not smile. She did not explain. She just told me she was fine and that I should not worry. I nodded because nodding was easier than arguing. But I watched her hands after that. They shook when she set a glass down. She held her phone like it was heavy. She flinched when it buzzed. The house looked normal again, but the mood did not, and my routine at night became less about comfort and more about control. I did not feel safe. I felt prepared. Prepared to wake up fast. Prepared to cover myself. Prepared to block the door. Prepared to run down the hall and bang on my mom's door hard enough to make the whole house hear. Prepared for what? I never said out loud. Then my mom announced, like it was nothing, that E was coming back for another weekend. The worst part was not the wedge, or the footsteps, or even the fear at night. The worst part was my mom starting to feel like a stranger in the same house. It happened in small pieces. She answered me slower. She stared at her phone like it was a threat. When I asked simple questions, she acted like she had to climb over a wall in her head to respond. She still did the things she always did, but her face looked empty while she did them, like she had stepped away inside herself. I kept wondering if it was my fault. I had asked for privacy. I had pushed back, even if I did it carefully. I had brought up my door. I had made her look at something she did not want to look at. I started to worry she was angry at me for making her life harder. I started to worry she blamed me for whatever tension now lived in the house. One afternoon, I finally asked her, because the silence felt worse than a fight. I found her in the kitchen, not really cooking, just moving things around. She kept wiping the same clean spot on the counter. Her phone sat beside her, face down. "Mom," I said, "are you okay?" She did not look up right away. When she did, her eyes looked tired in a way that scared me. Not sleepy tired, more like she had been carrying something heavy for days. "I'm fine," she said. I waited because it was not fine. The word did not match her voice. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked. That made her flinch. It was quick, but I saw it. She put the cloth down, and for a second it looked like she might cry, but she did not. She took a breath and tried to steady her face into something neutral. "No," she said, "you didn't do anything wrong." Her words were soft, but they did not reassure me. They sounded like a line she had practiced. I stepped closer. "Then what is going on?" Her eyes moved past me, like she checked the doorway, like she wanted to make sure nobody else could hear. The house was quiet, but she still lowered her voice. "I just need time," she said. "I need time to sort out my feelings. We will talk later." Later, that word made my stomach sink, because later could mean tonight, or next week, or never. It could mean she was trying to protect me, or it could mean she was avoiding me. It could mean she was hiding something terrible, or it could mean she was angry and did not know how to say it. I nodded anyway, because nodding was what I always did when I felt a conversation closing. "Okay," I said. My mom reached out like she might touch my shoulder, then stopped halfway and pulled her hand back, like she did not trust herself. small movement hurt more than if she had yelled. It made me feel like I was radioactive, like my fear had spread into her, and now she did not know how to be close to me without thinking about it. After that, I backed off, not because I stopped caring, but because I did not want to push her into snapping at me. I did not want to push her into defending him. I did not want to hear the words I feared most. You misunderstood. He didn't mean it. You're making it into something. Why are you trying to cause problems? I had no proof. I had no video. No recording. Only the memory of my door moving and a presence too close to explain. Only the feeling of shame in the dark. Only the way my sleep had changed. So I stayed quiet and I watched. I watched the way my mom moved when she thought I was not looking. I watched her hands when her phone buzzed. I watched her face when E's name came up in a conversation. Sometimes she smiled at a text, but the smile ended fast, like she remembered something and forced it away. I also watched how she acted around him. When he came over, my mom got tense in a different way. She became polite, too polite, like she was performing. Her laugh sounded higher. Her eyes checked his mood before she spoke. I noticed her standing between him and the hallway that led to my room more than once, like she did it without thinking. That made me feel two things at the same time. It made me feel safer because she was watching, and it made me feel worse because it meant she had a reason to watch. I wanted to ask her directly what she knew. I wanted to say, did you see something? Did he say something? Did you catch him doing something? But my throat locked every time I tried. I kept hearing her say she needed time. I kept hearing the promise that we would talk later. And I kept thinking that if I pushed too hard, she might shut down completely. So the problem stayed unnamed. And when a problem stayed unnamed, it did not feel smaller. It grew. It filled the quiet spaces. It sat at the table with us. It stood in the hallway when I walked to the bathroom. It waited outside my bedroom door, even when the wedge held. No one explained the problem, so I carried it alone. The house became tense in a way that did not need arguing. Nothing had to be said for the air to feel tight. I could feel it when I walked into a room. I could feel it in the way my mom paused before answering. I could feel it when E spoke, and my mom's eyes changed, just for a second, like she was evaluating him instead of listening. At night, I lay in bed and stared at my ceiling, listening to the house settle. I heard my mom's door open and close. I heard the bathroom light. I heard a glass set down somewhere. I told myself that adults moved around at night and it meant nothing. But now I knew the difference between normal movement and watchful movement. Normal movement had a purpose. Watchful movement had patience. I started to fear a new thing, worse than being alone with my thoughts. I feared that my mom knew something bad and still could not stop it. I feared that she was stuck between protecting me and protecting her own denial. I feared that if something happened again, she would hesitate and that hesitation would be the moment that mattered. The weekend of the at-home date night arrived like a test nobody announced. I heard my mom bringing in special takeout. I smelled food that was supposed to feel comforting, but it only made my stomach tighten. I heard the clink of bottles, the soft sound of liquid pouring into glasses. I heard their voices lower and warm as the night went on. I stayed in my room, telling myself not to be paranoid, telling myself the wedge was there, telling myself I would sleep. But as the house grew quieter and the drinks made the laughs slower and heavier, I kept looking at my bedroom door. I kept imagining that line of light under it shifting. And then came the night with drinks and a closed bedroom door. Something pushed against my bedroom door in the middle of the night, slow and steady, like a hand testing a locked window. I woke up instantly. My eyes opened to darkness, and my body went stiff before my mind fully caught up. I listened for the normal sounds that could explain it. The cat scratching, my mom walking to the bathroom, a gust of air, anything. The pressure came again, harder. The door did not open, but the frame gave a tiny complaint, a soft creak that told me someone was leaning into it. My wedge held, but the door still moved. Not open, just shifting in place, like the person on the other side was trying to feel where the resistance started. That detail made my stomach drop. It did not feel like an accident. It felt like someone working. I lay there with my blanket pulled up, staring at the bottom edge of the door. The thin strip of darkness under it stayed black. No light, no footsteps leaving, just that presence pressing, then stopping, then pressing again. My heart started racing so hard it felt loud. I held my breath to hear better, and that only made the silence worse. Silence meant whoever it was did not want to be heard. Silence meant they expected me to stay asleep. I shifted in bed, just enough to make the sheets rustle. The pressure stopped for a second, as if the person had noticed. I waited for the next sound to tell me this was harmless. A cough, a stumble, a whispered apology. Nothing came. I tried to speak without sitting up. My voice came out rough and quiet, and I aimed it at the door, letting whoever was there know I was awake. I asked what was happening. I asked if someone needed something. I waited for an answer. The only response was the door moving again. It was not a hard shove, not a panic push. It was controlled, patient, like someone who had time, like someone who believed the door would eventually give. My skin went cold. I thought about how easy it would be for someone to stand there all night if they wanted. I thought about how the wedge was the only reason the door stayed shut, and how a wedge was still just rubber. I reached for my phone, but I did not turn on the screen. I kept it in my hand like a small weapon, like I could call for help with my thumb without looking. My other hand went to my chest, gripping the blanket tight, because I suddenly remembered how I had slept. It did not matter how I had slept. It should never have mattered. But in that second, I felt the old shame try to rise up again, and I forced it down with anger. I needed control. I needed to be covered. I needed to see what was happening without being exposed. I sat up fast and quietly, then swung my legs out of bed. The door moved again, and I froze, listening. Still no voice. Still no footsteps leaving. It felt like the person on the other side had been waiting for me to move. I moved toward the chair where I had left clothes, keeping my eyes on the door the whole time. My hands shook as I pulled on a shirt. I stepped into shorts without caring if they were inside out. Every second I spent dressing felt dangerous, but I could not open that door without doing it. I refused to give whoever was out there even a glimpse of me in my own room. Once I was dressed, I stood still and listened again. The pressure came back, and this time it came in short pulses, like someone shifting their grip. The door hinge made a tiny sound. The wedge scraped a fraction against the floor. That scrape was the worst sound of all, because it proved the wedge could move. I realized I could not stay in my room pretending it would stop. If this was an emergency, they would speak. If it was my mom, she would say my name. If it was the cat, it would be scratching and meowing. None of that was happening. This was no longer about sleeping habits. It was about access. I walked to the door and crouched down. My fingers found the wedge. It felt warm from being pressed and stressed against the floor, like it had been fighting. I hesitated because removing it meant giving up the only barrier I had. Keeping it there meant staying trapped with a person on the other side who was not leaving. I made a decision that did not feel like a real choice. I needed to see who it was. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I needed proof that this was not in my head. I pulled the wedge out. The door shifted immediately, as if the weight on the other side had been waiting for that moment. I caught the knob with my hand to stop it from swinging open on its own. My pulse hammered in my ears. I straightened up and put my face close to the door, not against it, just near enough to hear breathing clearly. The breathing was there, slow and thick, right on the other side. I opened the door. At first, I only saw a shape in the dark hallway. A tall figure, too close, standing where the door would have hit if I had opened it faster. The person did not step back. They did not jerk away like someone who had been caught by surprise. They stood still, like they had already decided this was where they were allowed to be. My eyes adjusted enough to recognize him. It was A. He stood in front of my doorway with his shoulders loose and his head slightly forward, like he was tired, like he was not fully in control of his body. His eyes looked unfocused. His face was blank. His mouth hung slightly open, and I could smell alcohol even in the thin air of the hallway. He did not speak. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not say he had the wrong room. He did not say he needed help. He did not look confused, not like someone who had sleepwalked into the wrong place. He just stared into my room, at me, breathing quietly, swaying so little it was almost nothing. I stood in my doorway, holding the knob with one hand and the wedge behind my leg with the other, like I could put everything back the way it was if I moved fast enough. My brain ran through explanations again, and each one fell apart. If he had been looking for the bathroom, he would have moved past my door the moment he saw it was mine. If he had been sleepwalking, he would have looked lost. If he needed help, he would have said something, anything. He did not do any of that. The silence felt deliberate. The stillness felt deliberate. The way he had pressed the door without speaking felt deliberate. I told him I was uncomfortable. I told him to leave my door. My voice sounded strange to me, like it belonged to someone older, someone trying to keep control, while everything inside them screamed. He blinked slowly. He did not answer. He did not move away. I started closing the door. As I pulled it toward me, he stayed in place, close enough that I had to angle the door carefully, close enough that my arm brushed the edge of him in my mind, even if it did not in reality. My skin crawled with the thought of contact. I kept my grip tight and my movements controlled, refusing to show panic. The gap narrowed. The hallway disappeared inch by inch. And then, before the door could shut, another door opened down the hall, and quick footsteps rushed toward us. And my mom appeared in the dark and saw exactly where he stood. My mom came down the hall so fast I barely registered it as footsteps. It sounded like someone running on bare feet, not caring who heard. The moment her face appeared in the dark, her eyes locked on E standing at my door, and everything on her expression changed at once. She did not ask what happened. She did not look confused. She looked like she had walked into proof. For a half second, nobody moved. I stood with my hand on the knob, trying to close my door without turning my back. E stayed in that same spot, swaying slightly, still silent, still staring like he belonged there. My mom stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Then she exploded. Her voice ripped through the quiet house so loud it felt like it hit my chest. She shouted his name, shouted at him to get away from my door, and she did it with a kind of anger I had never heard from her. It was not a normal argument voice. It was the voice of someone who had been holding something inside, and it finally broke open. Whatever she had been carrying for days, it came out in one moment. He blinked slowly like he did not understand why he was in trouble. He tried to speak, but it came out thick and delayed, like he was building excuses one piece at a time. He gestured vaguely down the hall, toward the bathroom, like he could turn it into a mistake. My mom did not let him. She cursed at him, sharp and ugly, the kind of words she never used at me. She demanded he leave. She demanded it again, louder, closer, like she was willing her body to be a wall between him and my room. My mouth went dry. My hands shook around the doorknob, and the wedge. I felt like my mind split into two parts. One part stayed focused on E, tracking his feet, his hands, his distance. The other part stared at my mom, stunned by how quickly she believed what she saw. That belief hit me like a wave of relief, so strong it almost made me weak. I had spent so long imagining my mom dismissing me, telling me I was overreacting, telling me I misunderstood. But she did not hesitate. She did not ask me what I was wearing. She did not ask why my door had a wedge. She looked at him at my door in the middle of the night, and she reacted like a mother was supposed to react. E tried to talk his way out of it. He tried to sound calm. He tried to sound innocent. He slurred explanations that did not match his silence at my door. He claimed confusion, claimed he had been drinking, claimed it was nothing. My mom kept shouting over him. Her anger filled the hallway so completely that the whole house felt smaller. The cat skittered somewhere in the dark, startled by the noise. A light turned on further down the hall, making harsh shadows on the walls. E finally shifted back a step, not because he understood, but because my mom's rage left him no space to stand. I stayed half behind my door, listening and watching, terrified of the argument and terrified of what would happen when the argument ended. My heart still raced like I had been chased, and my skin still crawled from the memory of opening my door and finding him there, unmoving. My mom ordered him to get his things. The word things made the situation real in a new way. This was not her scolding him. This was her ending the night, ending his access, ending the idea that he could stay in our home after what he had done. E did not move fast enough for her. She stepped toward him and pointed down the hall like she was giving directions to someone who had lost the right to argue. He mumbled more protests. He tried to make her lower her voice. He tried to pull it back into a private conversation. My mom refused. She kept her voice loud, like she wanted neighbors to hear, like she wanted the walls to remember it, like she wanted him to feel watched the way I had felt watched. She told him to leave now. She told him he was not welcome. She told him he was done. I finally closed my door and put the wedge back in place with shaking hands. Not because it mattered now, but because my body still needed that barrier. I leaned my forehead against the wood for 1 second, breathing through my nose, trying not to cry, trying to keep my legs from giving out. Through the door, I heard them move. Heavy steps, unsteady steps, a drawer opening, the sound of something being shoved into a bag too fast. My mom kept talking, kept shouting, kept pushing him forward with her voice. The argument traveled down the hallway and toward the stairs, then toward the front of the house. Every sound felt sharp. A cabinet door hit too hard. A glass clinked. The front door chain rattled. Keys jingled like a warning. I stayed by my door, listening with my phone in my hand, ready to call someone if he came back down the hall. I hated that I still had to think that way, even while my mom fought for me. Fear did not turn off like a switch. It stayed in the body. Then I heard my mom at the front door, and I heard the night air rush in when it opened. E's voice rose one more time, louder, angry now, like he had finally understood the consequence and wanted to push back. He sounded offended, like he had been wronged, like he could not believe he was being thrown out for what he had done at my door. My mom's voice cut him off again, harder than before. There was a final burst of noise, the kind that came from someone stepping over the threshold with too much force. The front door slammed so hard the frame shook. The house went still for a beat, as if it was listening for him to return. Then my mom locked it. I heard the deadbolt click. I heard the chain slide into place. I heard her breathing, loud and uneven, like she had just run a long distance. She stood there for a moment without speaking, and even from my room, I felt the weight of that silence. The danger had moved outside, but it had not disappeared. Not yet, not in my mind. My mom walked back down the hall. Her footsteps were slower now, heavy with adrenaline. When she reached my door, she did not knock. She just stood there, close enough that I could feel her presence on the other side, like a guard. I opened the door a crack. Her face looked different than it had earlier that night. Her eyes were wide, wet, and furious, but beneath that I saw something else. I saw fear, not fear for herself, fear for me, finally sharp enough to break through everything she had been holding back. She told me to stay in my room. She told me he was gone. She told me she was sorry. And when her voice dropped from yelling to that low, shaking tone, I realized the fight in the hallway had not been the whole story. The slam of the front door had ended one problem, but it had started another, because after the door closed behind him, the real explanation finally began. My mom stayed outside my door like she was afraid to leave me alone for even 1 minute. I watched her through the small crack I had opened. Her hands trembled, and her breathing sounded wrong, too fast and too loud for the quiet house. The anger that had powered her down, the hallway had started to drain, and what was left looked like shock. I pulled the door open wider and stepped back so she could come in. I did not want to stand in the hallway anymore. The hallway felt contaminated. It felt like the place where E had been allowed to exist too close to me. My mom entered my room and shut the door behind her. I put the wedge back in place without thinking, like my foot moved on its own. The small scrape on the floor sounded huge after all the yelling. That tiny sound made my mom flinch. I saw it then. She had not been reacting only to what happened tonight. She had been reacting to the fact that I needed this wedge at all. She looked at my bed, my chair, the corner where I kept my phone charger, like she was seeing my room as a crime scene. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She stared at the door like she expected it to move. I told her to sit down. I guided her to the edge of my bed because she looked like she might collapse. I hated that my room had become a place where I had to take care of her. but I also needed her close. I needed her to stay in here with me until my heart stopped hammering. She sat, but her body stayed tense, like she was ready to stand up and run again. Her eyes stayed glassy and fixed. She kept shaking her head over and over, small movements, like she was trying to erase what she had just seen. I asked her what she knew. I asked her why she had been acting so distant. I asked her why she had said she needed time. My mom pressed both hands to her face and dragged them down slowly. When she finally looked at me, her expression had something I had never seen from her before. It was not anger. It was not disappointment. It was shame. She started with an apology, but it did not feel like enough. She told me she was sorry for not telling me sooner. She told me she was sorry for getting upset with me before, for making my privacy sound like a problem I created. She told me she had been wrong. Then she told me the reason she had been wrong. A few days earlier, she had looked at E's phone. She said it like it hurt to say. She said it like she hated herself for it, like she had crossed a line that she normally would not cross. But she also said it like she had done it because something inside her had already started screaming that she needed to know. When she told me what she found, I felt my stomach twist. She had seen messages he sent to a relative, not to my mom, not something he said out loud in our home. Messages he thought were private, messages he thought would never reach me. In those messages, he talked about me in a sexual way. My mom did not repeat the exact words to me. She did not need to. The way her voice shook made it clear enough. She said he had commented on my body. She said he wrote like he had been watching me and thinking about me, not as a kid in the house, not as his girlfriend's daughter, but as something he wanted. Then she told me the part that made my skin crawl. He had written about the future like it was a plan. He had said things that suggested he would leave my mom one day and try to be with me later when I was older. Like it was a joke. Like it was normal. Like I was an object that could be waited for. I sat there on my bed, holding my phone in my hand, and I felt my mind go blank. For a moment, I could not connect it to the man I had known for years. The man who ate dinner at our table. The man who laughed at movies with my mom. The man who stood in my doorway tonight without a word. I felt sick, not only because of what he said, but because he had said it while he still came into our home. He had said it while he still smiled at us. He had said it while he had access to my hallway, my bathroom, my door. My mom's eyes filled again, and she kept saying she was sorry. She kept blaming herself for letting him around me. She said she felt stupid. She said she felt like she had failed me. She said she had tried to figure out the safest way to end it without making things worse. I asked her why she did not tell me right away. She told me she had been scared. She had been scared of him. Scared of what he might do if he realized she had seen those messages. Scared of how quickly a breakup could turn into something dangerous when a man felt caught. scared that if she confronted him without a plan, he might retaliate or show up angry or refuse to leave. She also admitted something that hurt in a different way. She said part of her had been trying to process it because it did not feel real. She said she kept seeing the person she thought she knew, and she kept trying to make the messages mean something else because the truth was too ugly. That was why she had been distant. That was why she had been staring at her phone. That was why she had been moving around the house like a ghost. And that was why she had gotten angry at me earlier. She told me her anger had not really been about my sleeping habits. It had been about fear. She had been afraid of his attention on me, afraid of the idea that I could be exposed in my own home, afraid that I did not understand the risk yet because I was still trying to treat it like a normal privacy argument. Her fear had come out sideways, and she had aimed it at me because I was the safe target. She could not yell at the man in her head without blowing everything up. So she had tried to control the situation by controlling me. Hearing that made me feel two opposite things at the same time. I felt relief because it meant she believed me, and she had believed me before tonight. She had been carrying proof alone. She had been scared for me, but I also felt betrayed because she had let him come back anyway. I told her that. I told her I did not understand how she could read those messages and still let him sleep in our house. I told her I had been the one lying awake, listening to the hallway, and she had known why. My mom nodded like she deserved every word. She did not defend herself. She said she had been trying to end it carefully, and she had been trying to watch him, and she had been trying to keep the peace until she could remove him without a blow-up. Then she looked at me and admitted the part that mattered most. Tonight had been the blow-up she feared, but it had also been the proof she could not ignore anymore. E at my door, drunk and silent, had erased every excuse she might have clung to. She said she would not let him back in. She said she was done. She said she did not care what he claimed tomorrow when he sobered up. I believed her because of what I heard in her voice. There was no confusion left, no delay, no later. I sat beside her and listened to her breathe, and I realized how close we had been to a different outcome. If I had frozen and stayed silent, if I had not put clothes on, if I had not opened the door, if my mom had not come out when she did, I did not know what would have happened. I only knew I did not want to imagine it. My mom wiped her face and looked around my room again. Her eyes landed on the wedge. Then they landed on me. She whispered another apology, quieter than the rest, like she finally understood the full meaning of that small piece of rubber on my floor. The mother was not angry at her child's sleep. She was scared of a man's intentions, and even after she threw him out, even after she locked the door and stood guard outside my room, I felt the next fear rising, because removing someone like that from your home did not automatically remove them from your life. Now the question was what happened after you removed a person like that from your life. After that night, I did not feel like my story belonged to me anymore. It felt like it had spilled out onto a table where strangers could point at it from different angles and argue about what it meant. I read those opinions late at night with my phone close to my chest, like the screen could protect me. The strangest part was how the same facts made people react in completely different ways. Some people sounded calm and sure. Some sounded furious, like they wanted to fight on my behalf. Some sounded cold, like they were grading my choices. I kept scrolling anyway, because each comment felt like a vote on whether my fear had been real. The first group I noticed treated privacy like a hard rule, not a preference. To them, a closed bedroom door meant stop. It did not matter if it was a family house. It did not matter if someone thought it was harmless. They focused on the simple baseline that a teen had the right to be alone in her own room, and that adults had the duty to respect that without being asked twice. They made the whole situation feel less confusing. They treated it like a boundary problem, not a personality clash. Reading that made my chest loosen a little, because it meant I was not wrong for wanting something basic. Then there were the people who talked less about who was right and more about what I should do next. They turned the story into a safety plan. They pushed for stronger barriers, more rules, less guessing. They listed practical steps like using a lock, using a doorstop every night, keeping my phone charged, keeping it close, and making sure my mom and I had a clear plan if anything happened again. Their tone felt urgent, like they had seen situations like mine escalate. It did not feel comforting at first. It felt like someone handing me a checklist for surviving my own home. But it also made me feel less helpless because it gave my fear somewhere to go. A third group went straight at the part that had started the whole argument in the first place, what I wore to sleep. They refused to treat that as relevant. They acted like the clothing detail was a distraction that let the real problem hide in plain sight. They wrote as if my body was not the issue at all, and that anyone focusing on it was doing the exact thing that made teens easier to control. Reading that hit me hard, because I realized how much shame I had been carrying without admitting it. Even after I put a wedge under my door, I still worried that I was the cause of the attention. Those comments made it clear that the attention was the problem, not me. Then came the opinions that made me feel sick in a different way, because they aimed at my mom. Some people questioned her reaction earlier, the days of distance, the anger that did not make sense, the way she had made the situation feel like my responsibility. They said parents were supposed to protect first and process later. They pointed out how misdirected anger could silence a kid at the exact moment she needed to speak. I did not want to read those at first because my mom had thrown him out. My mom had yelled. My mom had chosen me in the moment that mattered. But the more I read, the more I understood why those comments stung. Because I had felt alone before the blow-up. I had felt like I was carrying something heavy without words for it. Those people were not saying my mom did not care. They were saying the gap between us had been dangerous. They were saying a parent could love their child and still fail them in the way they handled fear. That idea stayed with me because it matched what I had lived. Other people focused on E, not as a drunk man making a mistake, but as a risk that needed consequences. They talked about reporting, documenting, and not letting it stay inside the house like a private family issue. They suggested saving evidence if it existed, writing down dates and times, and taking the situation seriously, even if nothing physical happened. That group scared me because it meant they saw a pattern. They sounded like they knew how predators operated, how they tested doors and excuses and silence. They treated the hallway outside my room like a place where a line had almost been crossed, not like a misunderstanding. I found myself rereading those comments slowly, even though they made my stomach knot, because part of me needed someone else to confirm what my body already knew. Then there was another group that went even further, and their advice was not about wedges or locks. It was about distance. They told me to have an exit plan that did not rely on the hope that adults would always make the right choice in time. They said I should identify a safe relative, a friend's parent, anyone I could contact if I needed to leave quickly. They talked about keeping a bag ready, keeping important numbers saved, and never assuming a man like that would accept being removed quietly. Reading that made me glance at my bedroom window without meaning to. It brought back the feeling of mapping my house at night. It was not paranoia anymore. It was planning. And then there were the harsh voices. They were fewer, but they were loud in my head. They questioned why I had opened my door at all, why I removed the wedge, why I did not call my mom immediately, why I did not scream sooner. They talked as if there was a perfect way to react to danger, and if I did not follow it, I shared responsibility for what happened. Those comments made my hands sweat because they sounded like the same logic my fear had already been using against me. If you had done this instead, you would have been safer. If you had done that, you would not feel like this. If you had been smarter, you would have prevented it. I hated how easily those words slid into my mind because they felt familiar. They felt like the way girls were trained to think. Always adjust, always predict, always manage the situation so men could claim they did nothing wrong. When I got overwhelmed, I stopped reading for a while and stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the quiet of the house. The same house where my door had moved under someone's hand. The same house where my mom had stood in the hallway and finally seen it. I went back to the comments because I needed something I could not get from my own thoughts. I needed outside eyes to tell me I was not imagining it. I needed to know other people would have been afraid too. What surprised me was that even the supportive opinions did not all feel good. Some of them made me angry. Some made me sad. Some made me feel older than I wanted to be. It was validating to hear strangers say my privacy mattered, but it was also terrifying to realize how many people immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios, like they had seen this story before and knew how it ended. In a way, it made me understand my mom's earlier detachment better. She had not been calm. She had been flooded. She had been trying to hold the fear inside so the house could keep functioning. She had been trying to delay the explosion until she could control it. But fear did not stay controlled. It leaked. It changed the air. And as I read, I started to see the real argument underneath all the smaller arguments. It was not really about sleeping without a top. It was not about a wedge. It was not about a single night in a hallway. It was about who had the right to access me. The privacy camp treated my door like a boundary that should never be crossed. The safety planning camp treated my door like a barrier that needed reinforcement. The stop blamming sleepwear camp treated my body like it should never be part of the debate. The people questioning my mom treated the silence in our home like a danger of its own. The reporting camp treated E like a threat that needed documentation and consequences. The exit plan camp treated my home like a place that could become unsafe again without warning. Online, the same facts created very different judgments. I felt grateful and exhausted at the same time. I had wanted clarity, and I got it, but it came with weight. Because if all these strangers agreed on one thing, it was that the problem was not small. It was not just awkward. It was not just poor boundaries in a crowded house. It was a man who had stayed close long enough to feel entitled. I put my phone down for a moment and listened to the silence again. The wedge sat under my door like a small promise, but I knew a wedge could not fix what had already been revealed. A doorstop could not change the fact that E had stood there, drunk and silent, and my mother had finally seen him where he did not belong. And one thought kept rising through all the noise, heavier than the rest. If he could act nice for years, if he could laugh at our table and still write those messages, then what did nice even mean? But the biggest debate was still ahead. What did you do when the nice boyfriend was the problem? The longer I read, the more I felt like I was watching strangers circle my bedroom door with flashlights, arguing about what they saw. Part of me wanted to shut the whole thing down and disappear. Another part of me could not look away, because those comments took the fear I had swallowed for weeks and dragged it into the open where it could not hide. One camp did not soften anything. They treated E's behavior like a pattern, not a mistake. They focused on the combination of the messages my mom found and what he did at my door. To them, one creepy moment could be brushed off by a person who wanted to believe the best. But two different kinds of evidence, one private and one physical, meant intent. They pointed out that he had not knocked and spoken. He had not asked for help. He had waited in silence and pressed on my door like he was testing what he could get away with. They said the familiarity was not proof of safety. It was a tool. Years of being around a family could create the exact trust that made access easier. That framing made me feel sick because it fit too well. It explained why the pressure on the door had felt controlled. It explained why the silence had felt deliberate. It made me replay the exact angle of his shoulders when I opened the door, the way he had stood too close, the way he had looked through me like the room belonged to him. I kept thinking about the messages my mom described, not the details, just the fact that he had written about me like a future prize. People in that camp kept coming back to one idea. An adult sexualizing a minor did not exist on a scale where you could measure how bad it was and decide to forgive it. It was disqualifying. Full stop. Reading that felt like someone finally gave language to the disgust I had been fighting to control. But it also made me feel exposed in a new way. I had not asked to be seen that way by him, and now strangers were discussing the way he might have seen me. The attention, even when it was protective, still made my skin crawl. I hated that my body had become part of a story people used to warn each other. Another group took a different direction. They cared less about labeling him and more about what happened between me and my mom after the danger showed itself. They said my mom did the right thing when she saw him at my door. They said forcing him to leave mattered. But they also said the trust between a parent and a child could not be repaired by one explosive moment, even if it was the right moment. That camp focused on the gap before the blow-up. They saw that silence as damage. They talked about repair like it was a real task, not just an emotion. They suggested clear rules in our home for any future partner, like no access to my space, no wandering at night, no staying over without discussion, and no treating my privacy like a topic to debate. They also emphasized that apologies mattered only if they came with changes, because fear could make adults act strange. But the child still lived with the consequences. Those comments made my throat tighten, because I wanted to believe the problem was over now that he was gone. I wanted to believe the door slam ended the story. But the way my mom had flinched at the sound of the wedge told me the story had left marks on both of us. A normal home did not create that reflex. Then I read the advice that sounded like it came from people who had lived through something worse. They did not argue about morality. They argued about survival. Their main message was that leaving safely mattered more than being right loudly. They warned that confronting a person like E could escalate fast, especially if he felt embarrassed, rejected, or exposed. They described how some people became most dangerous when they realized they lost control. That camp made me think about the moment my mom yelled in the hallway. It had felt like protection, and it was. But it also had been a gamble. If E had been less drunk, if he had been angrier, if he had decided to push back physically, the night could have turned in seconds. The fact that it did not turn did not mean the risk was not there. They pushed the idea of controlled separation, having someone with you, making sure doors were locked, not meeting alone, not assuming that a breakup meant he would accept it. Those comments did not make me feel safe. They made me feel realistic, which was different and darker. They reminded me that people like him had already crossed the line in their mind. When you removed their access, you did not know what they would do next to try to regain it. I caught myself checking the front door lock more than once after reading those. I caught myself listening for cars outside, even during the day. I hated that my brain had started to scan for him like a threat that could return at any moment. But fear did not care that he was not supposed to come back. Mixed into all of this were comments that were not advice at all. They were just cruel. Some people did not act like they were talking to a teen. They acted like they were entitled to my story in the ugliest way. They questioned my choices in ways that felt like an attack. They made assumptions about my body, my intentions, my maturity, as if my sleep had been an invitation. They reduced the whole situation to what I wore, like the door and the wedge and the silence did not matter. A few comments crossed a line so hard that I felt nauseated reading them, because they sounded too similar to the way he had described me in private messages. That was the moment I truly understood the cost of telling strangers anything personal. Even when most people were supportive, some people used the same facts to do harm. They turned concern into prying. They turned discussion into a kind of starring. I felt angry at them, but I also felt angry at myself for being affected. I did not want a random person on the internet to have that power over my mood, but they did, because the situation already had me raw. I was still sleeping lightly. I was still hearing the sound of the door shifting in my head. Cruel comments did not land on a stable surface. They landed on bruises. At the same time, I could not deny the relief I felt from the people who took the risk seriously. Even the harsh safety advice had a strange comfort to it. It told me I was not dramatic for being scared. It told me that what happened was not normal. It told me that my instincts were not broken. And it also showed me something I had been avoiding. This was not only about it was about what a home was supposed to be. I started thinking about my mom in a different way, not as a villain and not as a hero, but as a person who had made a series of choices while trying to survive her own shock. She had believed me in the moment she saw him at my door. She had removed him. She had admitted her earlier anger was misplaced. But she had also delayed the truth until the threat forced her hand. That contradiction sat heavy in my chest. I loved her, and I also felt hurt by the days she left me alone with the unease. Both feelings were real. Reading strangers argue about it did not resolve that. It only made it clearer that what we needed was not more noise. We needed a new way to talk in our own house. The internet made it feel like everything had to be a verdict. Guilty or innocent, smart or stupid, safe or unsafe. But my life did not work like that. My life felt like a hallway at night where you listened for footsteps and tried to decide if you were overreacting until the door moved under someone's hand and you realized you were not. Removing a person was one step. Repairing a home was another step. E was gone, The locks were checked. The wedge stayed in place. My mom stayed closer to me than she had in weeks. But when the house went quiet, I still felt that old tension return, not because he was there, but because he had been there. He had been inside our routine, inside our trust, inside the space I thought was mine. He was gone, but the bigger question remained. How did a family rebuild trust after a threat came from inside the home? After that night, he stayed out of our lives. The house still looked the same in daylight, but it did not feel the same. The quiet did not feel neutral anymore. It felt like something we earned, something we had to protect. I kept expecting a knock. I kept expecting a text. I kept expecting my mom's phone to ring and her face to change again. Even when nothing happened, my body stayed ready, like it did not trust peace. I thought a lot about the door wedge. Before all of this, it was just a cheap object I bought to solve a simple problem without starting another fight. It was the kind of thing you used when you did not want to make a big statement. I told myself it was for the cat. I told myself it was not personal. But in the end, that wedge became the line that proved something was wrong. It was a small tool that forced the truth into the open. It turned my bedroom door into a boundary that had to be respected, not negotiated. It also showed me a hard lesson. If someone kept testing a boundary, they were not confused about it. They were studying it. When I lay in bed after everything, I kept replaying the moment I woke up to pressure on the door. Not just the fear, but the decision I made in seconds. I dressed. I listened. I chose to check. I chose not to freeze. I did not feel brave when I did it. I felt trapped. But later, I understood that I had protected myself the best I could with what I knew at the time. I also thought about my mom, because that part hurt in a different way. I felt grateful that she acted when she saw him at my door. She did not hesitate. She did not question me. She did not ask me to soften it or explain it away. She made him leave. That mattered. It mattered more than any online opinion, because it was the difference between being alone in that fear and having an adult finally stand between me and the threat. But I could not ignore the days before that. I could not ignore how her fear had turned into anger at me. I understood it more after she explained what she found, but understanding did not erase the impact. For a while, I had carried the feeling that my privacy needs were a problem I created. That feeling made me quieter than I should have been. Repair had to happen after removal. That became clear to me. My mom apologized, and I believed she meant it. She did not try to justify her misplaced anger as discipline or concern. She named it for what it was: fear, shame, and confusion aimed at the wrong person. That honesty helped because it gave us a place to start that was real. It also showed me something important. A parent could love you and still react badly. And when that happened, it had to be faced, not brushed away. I wanted our home to become a place where I did not have to earn safety by staying quiet. Even with E gone, I still noticed things I had ignored before. Not new events, just old patterns in myself. The way I avoided conflict, the way I tried to make my needs sound smaller so nobody got upset, the way I treated my own discomfort like it needed permission. This situation forced me to see that I had been trained, little by little, to accept less privacy than I deserved. It also forced my mom to see how quickly her trust in the wrong person could put me in danger. We talked more after that night, not in one perfect conversation, but in small, careful pieces. Sometimes my mom went quiet again, but it was different. It was not distance, it was processing. And I told her when I felt myself shutting down, because I did not want to go back to the version of us where we both stayed silent for different reasons. I knew there were other beliefs and behaviors in our home that needed to be addressed later. Things that did not feel safe or healthy, even if they were not as obvious as a man standing at my door. I did not want to list them like evidence. I just wanted to say the truth out loud. This could not be the only boundary we fixed. I planned to talk to my mom about those things in the future, when we both had space to breathe and the fear was not so fresh. Because I did not want to grow up thinking safety only happened after something scary proved it was needed. I wanted safety to be the default. What stayed with me most was how the story began and how it ended. It began with sleep. It began with a simple question about what I wore in my own room. It began with me trying to avoid conflict by making my solution look harmless. And it ended with trust. It ended with the realization that a locked door meant nothing if the people in your home did not respect what it represented. It ended with my mom realizing that being calm and polite was not the same as being safe. It ended with me realizing that my instincts were not dramatic. They were information. I still used the wedge. Sometimes I stared at it before bed and felt a strange mix of comfort and sadness. Comfort, because it reminded me I could protect my space. Sadness, because I wished I did not need a reminder. I also knew I could never go back to the version of my home where I assumed adults would always behave like adults. That innocence did not return. It just turned into something else. Caution, awareness, a sharper sense of what a boundary looked like when it was tested. If you were the parent or the teen in my situation, what clear rules would you set so privacy and safety were protected from day one? If you listened to this and had to pick one boundary rule that mattered most, what would it be? And what warning sign would you never ignore, no matter how long you had known someone? This story began with sleep. It ended with trust. The door was closed now, but what did it take to feel safe behind it?